I'm Leo Wood for Kit Guru. The NZXT H1 costs £300, which sounds absolutely crazy for a PC case. If you're listening in American, the NZXT H1 costs $350 US, which will similarly sound incredible. However, this is not a Mini-ITX PC case. This is a PC chassis that comes complete with a power supply, a liquid cooler, and a PCI Express riser cable. You get an awful lot of hardware for your money. NZXT claims those extras come to about $250. They're about right. So the bare case would cost around $100. The funny thing is, you cannot buy the H1 as a bare case. You have to buy it as this assembly. This is a Mini-ITX chassis out of the same mold as, say, the Phanteks Shift X and the Corsair One, in that it's a tower that stands vertically. The front I/O and the power button are on the top of the case. You've got glass on one face of it. The other three sides are heavily ventilated. It looks stylish. It wouldn't be out of place in a living room. It uses a combination of black and white. First, the glass panel. We peel off the film to reveal a warning TG sticker. Peel it really carefully. Really carefully. Oh yeah. Then we take the panel. Behold, tool free. Spin the H1 around. The other black panel. Similarly, tool free. And now we push up. And the chassis is exposed. This main cover is more clever than it might first appear. It has to sit like so. So these holes can line up with the front I/O, and it engages in those grooves. If we want to install the glass panel on the wrong face, we offer it up, and it won't go because the spacing of these two pins is different on this side to this side. So this panel will go on neatly here. This panel will not. At the top of the case, we have the 650 watt gold rated SFXL power supply. That's about £100 worth of kit. Below that, we've got a 140mm all-in-one cooler. That's about another £100. Spin the chassis around, pull out the accessory box, and we reveal the PCI Express riser, which is certainly worth some money. Maybe that's £50, so £250. NZXT is saying $250. I can't argue with their figure. In the accessory pack, we've got a mains power cord, a build guide, CPU cooler bracket parts, and a handful of cables, including there's a single jack in the front I/O on the top of the case. That gives you access to headphones and microphones should you require. We have a dual chamber design, so the graphics card goes in this side of the chassis and goes into the PCI Express riser, which by the way is Gen 3. So if you have a Gen 4 card, that riser isn't going to give you full bandwidth. And then around this side, we have the all-in-one cooler. We remove this to gain access to the motherboard tray. And there we have the cold plate for the CPU cooler. It has an Intel bracket on it at the moment, which can be swapped for an AMD hold down if we choose. The H1 is supplied with a dummy motherboard installed. As you can see, what we have is a chassis that has the CPU cooler already installed. It has the power supply already installed. The cables are already routed. There's a PCI Express riser cable for the graphics card, so we need to choose a motherboard and processor, install it here, install the cooler. If you choose to install a SATA SSD, there are a couple of bays there above the power supply. So really the choice of components boils down to motherboard, processor, memory, SSD and graphics card. For our build, we're using a Gigabyte B450i Aorus Pro Wi-Fi motherboard, obviously MINI-ITX, socket AM4 B450 chipset. The processor is a Ryzen 9 3900X, and we're using a 1TB WD Blue SN550 SSD. The parts go into the system surprisingly easily, absolutely no dramas whatsoever. Compared to a great many other small form factor builds, this is an absolute doddle. For memory, we've got 16GB of G.Skill Trident Z RGB. That's DDR4 3200 MHz. Because we're using AM4 rather than LGA115X, we've changed over the hold down plate for the all-in-one cooler, and that attaches nice and easily. Turning the system around, we install the graphics card in the rear compartment. It's a Gigabyte Gaming OC RTX 2080 Super with 8GB of memory. That slips into place, and then we simply connect up the power. I've done a number of small form factor builds over the years, and I have to say they are often a struggle. Installing components, connecting up cables, routing things, difficult. In the case of the NZXT H1, really straightforward. We're ready to test the H1, so we slide the main cover into place, remove yet another sticker, clip the two side panels into place, and at this stage in the proceedings, it's reasonable to ask why the H1 has a glass panel. It's heavily tinted. If you look through the glass, apart from that sticker I've removed, you can see the edge of a PCI Express riser. I don't understand why this panel is here to show off nothing, whereas if we flip the case around, we have a perfectly attractive perforated panel which clearly helps ventilation. If we had black vented panels on this side and the main cover with white on this side and this side, that would work for me. The glass on this face, don't understand it. It's also worth mentioning that in this particular build, my Gigabyte B450i motherboard does not support USB Type-C. Many ITX boards have limitations. After all, the manufacturers can only put so many ports and connectors into the limited space that is available. In this instance, Type-C is not one of the options. So if I take the Type-C out of the equation, I'm left with a single USB Type-A. That's not so good. A couple of ports would be better. Anyway, we're now ready for action. When you build a small form factor PC, you've got basically two choices. You can either put low power hardware inside, in which case you have a small, quiet, cool unit, or you can put high-end hardware inside your MINI-ITX system, in which case you've probably got a small furnace. The NZXT H1 manages to tread a line between those two paths, and it does it very neatly indeed. You can build a proper PC inside the chassis without any difficulty because so much of the hardware comes with the chassis. This is, do not forget, a full-on PC. It's got a Ryzen 9 3900X and an RTX 2080 Super graphics card. This is a full-on gaming PC. This is, and it amazes me to say it, more high-end than my own 12-core Threadripper with RTX 2080 PC, and that's a full-size liquid-cooled workstation. This small PC has grunt, and I can demonstrate that. We've got the normal preset applied to the cooling fan, and if I lean forward so I can see what I'm doing, and we run Cinebench 15 on this 12-core processor, and you can hear the cooling kicking up. But look at it, it's doing a lot of work. The maximum CPU temperature there was under 80 Celsius. It's obvious that one area of concern with this PC has to be the cooling. It has but the one fan. There's a slightly curious thing going on with the organisation of the hardware within the NZXT H1, which is that you use one fan connection for the pump and you use another fan connection for the fan. So you need two fan headers to control the cooling system. They are separate. Also, and this is probably regarded as a good thing, you don't use any control software. You don't use NZXT's CAM software, which has had a bit of a slating in recent times. So you're purely using either the BIOS to control the fan stroke pump curves, or you're using software that's supplied with your motherboard. In this instance, you can use Gigabyte System Information Viewer, which also controls fans. I was initially baffled by the fact that this chassis has a glass panel on one face. I didn't understand it. After all, what can you see through the glass? It's sort of a bit mysterious. There is some RGB glowing away inside, but that's because of my choice of hardware. It's perfectly possible that the NZXT H1 will show you nothing through the glass whatsoever. I think I've got to the root of that particular mystery, which is the glass side is quieter than the ventilated side by about 2 decibels. Do noise meter readings going around, this is the quieter side. I suppose you might argue that NZXT might have considered putting glass on 2 or 3 faces, and I'm quite certain that would have knackered thermals royally. As it is, this chassis cools, and as I say, I've got high-end hardware inside it. If you're to go for lower power, Ryzen 5, RTX 2060, i.e. a decent little PC, it would cool without a shadow of a doubt. Using Gigabyte's Smart Fan 5 function and setting it to full speed does not quite do what you think it might do. So in this instance, the single 140mm fan is not running at the moment at full speed. It's kind of surging a bit, but it's actually reasonably quiet. You see? If I now kick off a stress test, I'm going to use AIDA64, you'll hear the fan ramp up within moments, and it's really quite noisy. But then why shouldn't it be? The system's under unreasonable stress and the fan's been told to run at full whack, which in this instance is 1800 RPM. Running the TimeSpy stress test is interesting. This is graphics intensive work. The CPU is doing very little work at the moment. The system, not particularly loud because it's the graphics card cooler that's doing all the work. That triple fan Gigabyte graphics card, that's working hard, but it can keep the graphics card under control because heavily ventilated mesh. This is a high-end PC in a really small chassis, and it's working perfectly well. Overall, what do I think about the NZXT H1? So my first reaction when I saw it was to be mildly appalled by the price because it's expensive at £300, $350. But once you dig into it, you realise you're getting a lot of kit for your money. NZXT has just erred on the side of using conventional hardware in a conventional way, but they built it into the chassis to make it easy for you to assemble. So you get your motherboard assembly as I showed you, put it in, put the cooler on, connect everything up. There's not a lot of clearance for the cables, the connections and so on, but there's just enough clearance that it all goes together neatly. Job done. I do have space in here for 2.5 inch drives, and I could, if I chose, install those drives. Sometimes you've got bays and it's just not practical to use, not really. In this instance, yes, absolutely. So I have a 1TB M.2 SSD. I could easily add more storage if I wanted. As I've said a number of times now, this is a genuine full-on PC. Once you allow for the fact that the chassis comes with the cooling system, £100 worth, power supply, £100 worth, PCI Express riser cable, which works perfectly well. When you take all that into account, the actual chassis is actually fairly cheap. It's a good deal, and I did not think I'd say that at the start of this review. As to whether you want a Mini-ITX system, that of course is a completely different question, but why not? Well, I can give you one reason why you might not want Mini-ITX, particularly in this vertical form factor, which is the connections have to go in the bottom. I've got the mouse, keyboard and DisplayPort cables trailing out of the rear of the case and down off the table. If you wanted to plug in many things, that might be problematic. It's obvious that the rear panel I/O is actually on the bottom, and then you've got this limited front panel I/O on the top. That may well be tricky for you. It may, on the other hand, not be a problem. It all depends on what kind of hardware you're intending to connect. In conclusion, I am impressed by the NZXT H1. Really impressed. It's good. I can think of one realistic criticism of the H1. In addition to the usual, it's Mini-ITX, therefore you get limitations, therefore, because that's just inherent to Mini-ITX. If you're going to do Mini-ITX, this is a good way of doing it. My criticism is the stickers that NZXT's plastered on various components you need to peel off. They've made it unnecessarily difficult for no good reason. If you decided you want to go down the Mini-ITX road and that small form factor is for you, NZXT is supplying a chassis that makes the assembly just as easy can be. Deeply impressed, big thumbs up, good value for money, decent performance. Like it a lot. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, head over to kitguru.net, read our reviews, read our views, read our news, look at the photos, head over that way, buy a t-shirt from the merch store. I'm Leo Woodard for Kit Guru. This is the NZXT H1